we bring in Phil Steele again? Phil, first off, thanks so much for coming back on with us. You were on with us last year. We loved talking with you, so glad to have you back for another year.
Yeah, definitely. Always enjoyed talking UCF football.
Well, let's start off bigger picture, and we'll get into UCF. Your magazine, your legendary magazine, the Phil Steele College Football Preview Mag, 350-plus pages, Phil. You do it year in and year out. For those who don't know, quickly walk us through your process. How do you go about preparing a behemoth of a document like this with all the research that goes into it?
Yeah, and it's changed a little bit with the transfer portal. Now we have to update the power ratings almost on a daily basis with players coming and going through the majority of the spring. The good news is this year the transfer portal closed on May the 1st, and so we went to the press on June 8th. We were able to capture almost all of the moves that happened in the transfer portal. But walking you through the process, it's a 7-month process. It starts the Sunday after Thanksgiving. You know, I've just watched every game for the entire season, and then I go through the first write-through of the magazine, which is the postseason write-through. And to give you an example from this past year, I'm going to use USC. USC, after I did the postseason write-through, was middle of the road in the Pac-12 South. And what I mean by postseason write-through is I read through every article that was written about the team the entire year. I just watched them. Now I've relived the entire season, go through all the ebbs and flows of each position, and then I write each position. I say, okay, what kind of shape are they heading into last year? What happened? What kind of shape are they heading into next year? And at that point, USC was middle of the road in the Pac-12 South. The second write-through process happens pre-spring. We get the rosters now for the spring. We get in the freshmen that have signed since the first write-through process, and we adjust the ratings. And USC moved up a little, but not much. And then the third write-through process is after I talk to the head coaches. And this year I talked to 120 of the 131 head coaches out there. So I'm on the phone with Coach Lincoln Riley. Ironically, the day they signed Jordan Addison, now all of a sudden the USC roster looks like Caleb Williams as your starting quarterback, my number one QB out of high school last year, who started Oklahoma the second half of the year and knows the offense in and out. Mario Williams, my number 2 rated wide receiver out of high school last year, signed at Oklahoma and did well. They brought in the Blitnikoff winner and Jordan Addison, a wide receiver, Travis Dye, a 1,000-yard rusher from Oregon. And when I talked to Coach Riley, one of my concerns was the offensive line, but he told me he really liked the top-end experience and didn't expect to inherit this much talent. Defensively, he brought in 12 or 13 transfers, including a guy like Shane Lee, who started 13 games as a true frosh at Alabama, of all places. Now, all of a sudden, USC vaulted to my number 1 most improved team in the country, and I had them second in the Pac-12 South behind a loaded Utah. So that gives you an example. We write it in a 3-month process, and it takes about 7 months to write this thing.
Look, and you can find Phil's magazine. You go to your website, philsteele.com. You can follow him on Twitter at philsteele042. Digital copies are available. Print copies are available. And you want to pick that up again. It's the most comprehensive college football magazine there is out there, Phil. But let's transition to UCF for a second, right? So I know you've got some really good thoughts on UCF 2022, but I want to start with UCF 2021. Obviously, a rash of injuries kind of took hold of the Knights in 2021. As you went back and watched that film, watched all those games from last year, what did you see from that 2021 UCF squad?
Well, I saw an explosive team the first 3 weeks of the season when they averaged 45 points per game, 554 yards per game, and then Dylan Gabriel got injured. And, you know, when you take a freshman quarterback and throw him into the fire like Mikey Keene did last year, you're going to expect some ups and downs during the course of the year. And all of a sudden in the last 9 games, UCF averaged just 28 points per game and 357 yards per game. So that's one thing I saw. Another one would be, as you mentioned, it wasn't just the quarterback position that was hit hard with injuries. It was the majority of the team. In fact, UCF was among my nation's leaders in starts lost last year. Generally, that bodes well for a team the next year because you get the injured players back, and then players that were thrown into the fire are also back and have more experience than you would expect. So it was a rocky couple of games. I thought the Louisville game, I mean, what a turnover at the end of the game. I get an interception. It looks like UCF's going to win. Yeah. Next thing you know, interception on the next play, and it's a 7-point loss, and you lose your starting quarterback at the end of the game. The Navy game could have gone either way, ended up being a 4-point loss. The Cincinnati and SMU games on the road, I thought it was just a depleted roster taking out very good explosive teams on the road, which were the cause of those. But overall, I think UCF did probably as good as you could expect due to the injuries.
Yeah, I think a lot of us were encouraged by the bowl victory against Florida in the Gasparilla Bowl. I mean, UCF played really well. A lot of guys back, Isaiah Bowser, namely, back in that game. When you watched the Gasparilla Bowl, did you kind of see, to your point, injuries kind of subsiding for UCF and understand what that trajectory might look like when you saw how they played the Gators?
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you look at UCF, when I went over the team with Coach Malzahn last year, it seemed like he brought in 10 or 11 Power 5 transfers. And what did he do this year? Brought in another 10 or 11 Power 5 transfers, plus they get back the players that were forced to play last year, plus the injured players back. This is a UCF team that's very dangerous. In fact, I rate them my number one group of 5 team out there this year.
Yeah. Well, you rate the offense, too. You have a statistical measure to kind of understand the offense. You have them potentially scoring somewhere up in the 40 points per game range. But I think UCF's embroiled in a QB controversy now. John Rice Plumlee is coming in. Didn't play quarterback last year, but coming from Ole Miss, obviously Mikey Keene. How does your evaluation change if it's John Rice Plumlee or Mikey Keene at quarterback for UCF?
Well, the good news is that if Mikey Keene wins the job this year, it's not going to be Mikey Keene of last year. Last year's Mikey Keene was a true freshman quarterback that was thrown into the fire, and so he's going to take some lumps in that respect. This year, now he's a guy that's led the team to 9 wins last year, led them to the wins that they did get in the second half of the year. He's bigger, he's stronger, and I think his teammates have confidence in him. John Rice Plumlee, while he was playing wide receiver last year, I just go back to 2019, watching this guy play at Ole Miss, and it's the 8 games he started. He is an athlete. He can take off and run. He's one of the fastest players on the field. And when you're trying to defense John Rice Plumlee, he can go score a touchdown on you if you don't have a spy. And even if you have a spy, he can likely outrun that spy. So he's very dangerous. His Frost year in the SEC was phenomenal, and I think he can have that type of year this year. So I do think Plumlee wins the job, but no matter who wins the job, it's vastly improved quarterback play over what they had the last 10 games last year.
And in your preseason polls that you put out, you have UCF ranked number 17, which is pretty high, higher than a lot of other folks have them. What did you see from UCF that you liked that gave you confidence to slot them in at number 17?
Yeah, just look at each position. I like the quarterback spot. I have them in my top units. The running back spot, you've got Isaiah Bowser. They also had Johnny Richardson, of course, who was a top recruit coming out and had 7 starts in 2021 last year. You add in a DeMarcus Bowman from Florida, who was my number 2 rated receiver or running back out of high school. Mark Anthony Richards from Auburn. It's a deep running back core. Now, receiver-wise, you bring in the top receiver from Auburn to go along with Ryan O'Keefe. Ryan O'Keefe is a guy that proved last year what type of receiver he is. He's the bell cow, the MVP of the offense. And, then you bring in a tight end like Kamor Gamble, who was my number 14 rated tight end. And this is a big boy at tight end. He looks the part, played at Florida last year. I thought that was a great get. Offensive line, you add in a Ryan Swoboda from Virginia to go along with an already veteran offensive line. This is an offensive line that has 132 career starts. That's a great piece to start. So offensively, I think UCF is going to be explosive, as you mentioned. And then defensively, just the amount of transfers brought in. A guy like Terrence Lewis was my number 1 rated linebacker out of high school, originally signed at Maryland. Another Maryland VHT, Brandon Jennings, was my number 11 rated linebacker out of high school. They bring in a Lee Hunter on the defensive front. And this is to go along with last year's transfers as well. Jarvis Ware, I think, is a very underrated pickup at free safety from Missouri. He's a guy that I think has NFL potential. Austin Pease, Kobe Perry comes in at safety. So it's a deep team. They go 2-3 deep at every position. And that's one reason that I like UCF. The other one would be the schedule. They avoid Houston in ACC play. The top 3 teams in my mind in the AAC are Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston. They avoid Houston, and they get Cincinnati at home. And as you know, UCF is 30-2 in the bounce house the last 5 years. So getting them at home, I think, is big. Cincinnati in a little bit of a rebuilding mode. I can see the potential for UCF to be favored in every single one of their games this year, and that's why I've got them up there at number 17.
If UCF struggles this year, where do you think that'll be? What do you think that'll mean if UCF struggles from a win-loss perspective?
I would have to say I would look towards probably they don't get a quarterback that steps in and plays like I think they will, because that was the problem last year, although I don't think that's going to happen. And then a little concerned about the linebacking core. I mean, they have a chance to be solid, but I need to see it out of the linebacking core. And, there are a couple of games on the schedule that could trip them up. Louisville's very dangerous. Yep. Cunningham at quarterback is an extremely he's a playmaker at that quarterback position. And more so than John Rice Plumlee, Cunningham is a guy that throws the ball very accurately. So I think he is a polished quarterback of what John Rice Plumlee hopes to be. Other possible trip-up games, that road game against East Carolina is very dangerous. Mike Houston's building a solid squad there at East Carolina. They get that one at home. Playing Memphis on the road. I talked about UCF's home record. Memphis actually has one of the best home records as well. That's not an easy place to play. So I think there are potentials based on the schedule and then the quarterback and linebacker play potentially there.
How big is Isaiah Bowser for UCF? You have him on your second all AAC team, a big back, a transfer from Northwestern, got injured a bunch last year. When he was in the game, things were vastly different. How big an X factor do you think a healthy Bowser could be for UCF in 2022?
Yeah, and I think Gus Malzahn summed it up when I was talking to him. He said that when he was healthy, we were a completely different team. And I love that quote. That just tells you how good Isaiah Bowser was last year. And the beautiful thing is they can keep him healthy because they've got the depth at running back now to be able to split the carries and keep him 100%. But I love 6'1". I love 225. He is an NFL type of running back that he almost left. I think had he not got banged up last year, played the entire season, he'd be in the NFL right now. So you got to love that if you're a UCF fan.
On the defensive side of the ball, you have the defensive back group rated number 1 in the AAC, but you have them rated number 8 nationally overall. What do you like about what UCF's put together in the secondary?
Well, you start with UCF last year. They finished number 12 in my past defense rankings. And my past defense rankings don't just look at the stats. They also look into who you played. And then the unit returns basically intact. As I mentioned, Austin Peay transfer, Kobe Perry is a big pickup here. And I'll say this. I mean, he's a guy that was a Buck Buchanan finalist last year, the top defensive player in the FBS. And when I was talking to the head coaches this year, probably by Coach 10, it started to hit me that, these FCS transfers are making a big impact. The majority of them are starting and doing well. So I started delving into that with each of the head coaches. That would be one of the questions I asked anytime we ran across an FCS dude. And they all said, Phil, it comes down to repetitions. These FCS guys come in, they've got the reps, and they're able to play right away. Plus, they have a chip on their shoulder. So I'm expecting big things out of Kobe Perry. And you look at former Missouri transfer Jarvis Ware. He's a guy that has 17 career starts. He missed last year. He comes in, and I think he's got NFL potential. Everybody else is back from a secondary that was number 12. I'm very high in the secondary for UCF.
Yeah, you have Devontae Brown, second team all AAC. I think that's a name folks are going to want to keep an eye on. He's a really good lockdown corner. But you mentioned Gus Malzahn. Obviously, you've done your magazine for a bunch of years now, so you've talked to Gus a few times, I assume, over the years, particularly when he was at Auburn. How have you seen Gus change as he's kind of moved into UCF? Do you see a different Gus just in terms of his demeanor and his offensive philosophy? How is Gus different from the Gus we saw at Auburn?
Yeah, I don't know if the offensive philosophy changes all that much. I think, when you're taking on 8 SEC defenses during the course of a season and then taking on non-SEC defenses, I think you can be a little more wide open. And I think we saw that when he was at Arkansas State, and then we saw that at Auburn at times. I mean, when they had Cam Newton, they had an extremely explosive offense. But I think with Malzahn, probably the biggest difference is, and this would be anybody who was in the situation. I mean, at Auburn, he was under heavy fire and heavy pressure. He was on the hot seat list every single year. He was under pressure to perform, and yet he still did great. I mean, he's got more wins over Alabama than the other head coaches had since Nick Saban took over. Now here at UCF, it's not the hot seat list. He can feel more comfortable at what he's doing at UCF, and I just think he's more comfortable as well. Like I said, anybody else would be in his shoes.
How do you think about UCF in terms of the state of Florida? There's a ton of conversation in state about, the big threes and now the big four. Obviously, you have Miami rated pretty high. Florida State are doing a little bit of rebuilding, although they certainly have quality talent. Where do you think of, or how do you slot UCF when you think about the state of Florida? Are they 2, 3, 4? Are they up and coming? Where do you see them based on your analysis?
Yeah, heading into the year, I mean, I think Miami is right at the top with the chance of doing the best of the Power Five teams. Florida has a first-year head coach, so there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve there, but they do make my number 2 most improved team. Florida State, hoping to get to a bowl game under Mike Norvell. I do think they're talented. Right now, this year, heading into the year, I probably have UCF rated second among the 4 teams, I believe. I'm going to have to double-check where I have Florida rated prior to the year. I have Florida 32. Yeah, so I've got UCF number 2 coming into the year. Now, long-term potential, I mean, Florida can get there easily, Florida State. But I love the situation UCF is in. They have a rabid fan base, a great home field edge. They're playing in the state of Florida. They can attract P5 talent like they've proven under Gus Malzahn. So, heading into this year, I'd put them at number 2.
Let's switch gears for a second, talk about the American Conference. When the coaches poll came out, Cincinnati and Houston both featured in the top 25 at 22 and 25 respectively. You have Houston rated number 34 overall, where a lot of folks think are really high on Houston. Where are you at with Houston? What's your evaluation on them, and how dangerous do you think they're going to be in the American Conference this year?
Well, their biggest danger is the fact they don't have to play UCF or Cincinnati, so that's a big plus to have. I probably would have been a little bit higher on them had Alden McCaskill not suffered the ACL in April. Mm-hmm. I really don't think he's going to see the field this year. And then if you take away Alden McCaskill, he was their top running back last year. Now, they still have Tejon Henry. They still have Stacy Sneed, who the redshirt freshman added in. But I'm not sure McCaskill's going to see the field this year. Now, the receiving corps is dangerous with Tank Dell and Kashawn Carter. The offensive line does lose a couple of key starters from last year. In fact, they only have 2 starters back on the O-line. The defensive line loses some players, but let's keep in mind, Sack Avenue was Sack Avenue last year, and they should be just Sack Avenue again this year, which makes that whole defense dangerous. The UH actually averages 22 years old per starter, so it is a veteran team. I think if the offensive line comes around and the running back position can get solidified, they're going to be very dangerous. And as mentioned, avoiding UCF and Cincinnati in league play is a plus. I don't like the fact they have to play Texas Tech on the road, Memphis on the road, SMU on the road, and East Carolina on the road. I think all 4 of those games are tough.
And then Cincinnati, obviously a college football playoff team last year. You mentioned at October 29th in the Bounce House that they come to play UCF. That's going to be one I think everyone's got circled on their calendars. But they lost a lot of talent, Phil. Obviously, a lot of guys are playing now on Sundays from that team last year. What's your evaluation on Cincinnati? Where do you think they may struggle this year, or where do you think they may actually do really well?
Yeah, take you back to 2017, my first conversation with Coach Fickle, and going through the lineup with him. And I wasn't overwhelmed. They hadn't done a good job in recruiting the previous 3 years prior to Coach Fickle taking over. And, he told me he was very confident that he would get this thing turned around, and it was clearly a rebuilding year. Then 2018, the roster started shaping up a lot better. He had his first full recruiting class coming in. And generally, anytime you talk to a second-year head coach, he's going to tell you they're in much better shape than the previous year. They now know the players' strengths and weaknesses. The players are bought into the system. They had their first full recruiting class, and boom, it all took off for them, getting to 11-2, and now they've been dominant each of the last 4 years. While there is talent heading out the door, and I don't think this year's team is quite up to last year's standards, replacing a guy like Desmond Ridder, replacing their team MVP and Jerome Ford at the running back spot, a couple of star running backs and Pierce and Young, and then defensively losing to Myjai Sanders, Curtis Brooks, and the best cornerback combo in the country with Kobe Bryant and Sauce Gardner. A lot of players gone, but Coach Fickle's done a great job building this team, and they still have good depth. They still have good players in the third string, something they didn't have when he took over. So I do think they have talent. A lot of it's going to depend on quarterback play. Ben Bryant went to Eastern Michigan, got the benefit of playing, and now he's back at Cincinnati. I think that's a big plus, and there's good talent throughout. So Fickle's done a great job building this team, and that's why even with the losses they have, I still think they're a legitimate contender in the American.
You mentioned ECU. I think that's a sleeper team in the American Conference this year. Do you have any other teams, any other sleeper teams we should look out for?
I think East Carolina is the big sleeper this year because, Mike Houston, when he took over, and I compared East Carolina's first-year defense in 2019 against the defense he had at James Madison, and I would have taken James Madison's defense over East Carolina's defense that year. And he said they were small and speedy on the defensive line. That's not what he wanted. He wanted size in the defensive front seven. So it's taken him some years to build this thing up. But if you watch East Carolina last year, they could easily have won the UCF game. They could easily have won the Houston game last year. The South Carolina game, they gave up a field goal on the last play. They were very dangerous. And this year they've got 15 returning starters. Holt Nailers is back at QB. I love the running back combo of Mitchell and Harris. The offensive line, it's the best group on the O-line that they've had since Houston's been there. This is Houston's best offense and best defense that he's had. And last year they could easily have been better than their 7-5 record. They are extremely dangerous in the American Conference. And I think overall there's, if you're looking for some sleeper teams, a team like Tulsa is getting no respect in the preseason media, and yet each and every year they're up there playing strong. And then Tulane coming off a 2-10 season. I think they get back to a bowl game. I've got them as my number 7 most improved team in the country. But East Carolina would be the one that would scare me if I'm a UCF fan.
Obviously, UCF will transition to the Big 12 next season, so I'd love to get some early thoughts for you on this year's Big 12 as we keep an eye on that conference. Obviously, Oklahoma breaking a new quarterback, new coach. Texas, new quarterback, new coach. So some unknowns there. Baylor, you have ranked at 14. Who's the team that you think maybe makes the most noise out of the Big 12 this year?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Oklahoma, and you take it back to last year, Adam, and that is that last year. Everybody was experienced with the exception of the big boys. And what we saw was Clemson didn't even make the ACC title game. Ohio State didn't make the Big Ten title game. Oklahoma didn't make the Big 12 title game. Heck, Alabama lost to A&M, nearly lost to Florida and LSU, should have lost to Auburn. They needed a miracle comeback in 4 overtimes. This year, I think the Powers get back to being the Powers. And with Oklahoma, they add in Dylan Gabriel. And I'm not sure if UCF fans remember him. It was a long time ago.
His name comes up every now and again.
Yeah, in 2019, he had a pretty doggone good year. And now guess who his offensive coordinator is? It's Jeff Levy, the same offensive coordinator he had at UCF. They've got a great offensive line. They've got dangerous receivers, running backs. They'll have one of the most potent offenses in the country. And Brett Venables knows defense. And last year, Oklahoma lost 2 games. At Baylor, a team that had the entire team back, and at Oklahoma State, a team that had its entire defense back. And Oklahoma didn't have everybody back last year, and they lost those 2 games on the road. Well, this year, they get both those teams at home. And if you look at the last 3 years when home crowds have been in the stadiums, Oklahoma is 20-0. They haven't lost, and they get both Baylor and Oklahoma State at home. That makes me think Oklahoma's got a great chance of even running the table. But I'll say this about the Big 12. They are good top to bottom. Even let's go down to team number 10. It used to be automatic for me, Adam. Just take Kansas, pick them last,
Sure.
move on to the next one. It's pretty easy. But I tell you what, their head coach, Lance Leipold, this is a guy that got it done at Buffalo. And last year, somehow, some way, in his first year, he took over after spring practice was over. They were 1-8 with their one win, a close one against South Dakota. They somehow beat Texas, and then they were a different team. Jalen Daniels took over at QB. They went into TCU, had a close loss. West Virginia had a close loss. Nearly went 3-0 down the stretch. Jalen Daniels is back. Practically the entire team's back. This Kansas team's going to cause some struggles for opponents. I think we're going to see some upsets in the Big 12 because while the top 5 teams in my mind are Oklahoma, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Texas, and Kansas State, you take a team like Iowa State with Matt Campbell, who's back in the underdog role where he thrives, and I think Hunter Deckers can have better QB stats than Brock Purdy even had last year. TCU, Sonny Dykes told me that he felt he was surprised at the amount of talent he had. They were a better team that he inherited than he thought. West Virginia brings in a quarterback in J.T. Daniels where QB was the difference. And even Texas Tech with Joey McGuire. You talk to this guy, you want to run through a wall. He's a very enthusiastic head coach that has some talent there. So I think the Big 12, top to bottom, is one of the toughest conferences to call this year.
Well, and you got to feel good if you're the Big 12 bringing in. I mean, you mentioned the top 3 schools in the American. Those 3 are all going to the Big 12 next year. Plus, you're adding BYU. I mean, you got to think the Big 12 is positioned to be really powerful in the coming years.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, prior to bringing those guys in, Adam, last year, if you would have put me on the radio and said, Phil, what do you think of the Big 12? I'm like, they're done. They lost Texas and Oklahoma. They only got 8 teams left. They're going to be out of the picture. And now I feel completely different about the Big 12. I mean, I think all 10 teams are on solid footing. And as you mentioned, they get the top 4 group of 5 teams added in. Cincy, UCF, Houston, and BYU are all tremendous teams coming in. the Big 12 is now all of a sudden a strong conference, and my outlook on the Big 12 has drastically changed from what it was just after the announcement of Texas and Oklahoma leaving last year.
All right, Phil, I'll let you get out of here with this one final question. You are one of the only folks out there that actually ranks the long snappers. And UCF has a good one on Alex Ward. He was third team last year. He's third team again this year for you, All-American. What does Alex Ward have to do to get first team All-American, Phil? What do we got to do to get a campaign to get Alex Ward first team Phil Steele All-American?
Well, the first thing we have to do is I can't hear his name all season long, because if the only time you ever hear the long snapper's name is when they make a mistake, and we haven't heard his name on TV, so let's keep his name off of TV prior to the year. But I think he's got NFL potential. He's 6'4", he's 240. And there's just so many good long snappers out there this year, but he is definitely worthy of being my first-team All-American. And naturally, I'm on the Manili Award for the long snapper of the year. So I've got my eyes on Alex Ward this year, and hopefully it's a nice, quiet year. But coverage is big. In a 240, he can do that. Getting the ball back quick is another important thing. We can't have a lot of pressure on our punter, and we got to have a high field goal percentage by getting the ball back accurately. But he is one of the best in the country.
All right, I'll make sure he hears that and keeps his name out of the headlines this year, Phil. But we appreciate you hopping in. As always great to chat with you, talk UCF football. Again, Phil Steele College Football Preview Magazine, 350-plus pages of just jam-packed information. You can find more at philsteele.com or follow Phil on Twitter. That's philsteele042. And you can learn more about where to get the magazine, digital, and print versions available. Phil, thanks so much for taking your time, man. Best luck to you this upcoming season, and hopefully we catch up again next year.
Yeah, a lot of fun talking UCF football with you today, Adam.